Hello again, Steve here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole YouTube going on its censorship program once again, and how this is basically a- an opportunity to learn about the momentum of trends in general. This is nothing new, I wouldn't say. It's not to be surprised about and everything else. I mean, think about it. What was it, about 10 years ago YouTube started, maybe 15 years ago? And it was what it was. If you were to look back at it from what it is today to what it was then, you would see a very different, very grainy. I mean, even my videos would look like professionally done, probably, but it would be very much more antiquated looking, and just the look and feel of it would be different. And what you could say, what was permissible then, is not permissible now, and so on and so on. So there's trends always happen, right? And they happen, I don't know, I guess because we find out more, people try to take advantage of this, take advantage of that, things we haven't seen. And of course, there's all sort of people who are moral, people who are amoral, all that stuff all going on at once. So things change in the process. And, I just wanted to use a couple of other examples of how we shouldn't be surprised when things change. Like, for example, I watched one of there's a little shout out for Chris Chappell here, China Uncensored. I watched some of his videos. I think he does a good job. And he was interviewing this lady. I forget her name. I should have got the name, but she's some sort of a pop star in Hong Kong. And they were talking about how Hong Kong right now is going through a new version of what they call the umbrella revolution, I guess, where people are protesting this incursion of China putting more and more of its regulations on Hong Kong, because Hong Kong, we can't forget, is supposed to be, even though it was given back from England or Britain to China, it was supposed to remain sort of as it was for 50 years. I think until 1947 or something like, or 1947, 2047, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But anyway, it's supposed to remain that. But if we think about it, nobody in their right mind was going to think that the Chinese were just going to leave Hong Kong alone. No, they were going to incrementally put things in there to make it more like China, so that when the day came in 2047, when it becomes fully China, it's China. I mean, it wasn't going to go along just completely like Hong Kong, free market Hong Kong, and so on, when everybody had basically civil rights and so on, and then all of a sudden it's China, the big gulag, the working gulag of China. No, of course not. So that's the momentum, and you can see it incrementally changing. What is it? We're on about 20 years now, about close to more than a third of the way through that, and they got army based in Hong Kong. They brought in a new extradition treaty, which is if you're not behaving according to Beijing in Hong Kong, they can extradite you and throw you in a salt mine or something like that in mainland China. Of course, of course, this was going to be right. This is China after all, and another one would be example of the march of socialism worldwide. I mean, this is a long, long. If you look at socialism as a bear market for freedom, right? Bear market is the reason it's called a bear market. This is how I remember it. A bear stands with its head down, so we're going into the dumper in terms of freedom. And a bull market is the horn sticking up. We're going up. We're exalting. We're going up to a greater level of life, which is freedom, right? So there's a lot of pressure on freedom, and we've been going into this bear market. We see, but within every trend, there are breakouts. In an uptrend, there's breakdowns, but if the trend remains, it comes and hits a new high, and so on. And in bear markets, down, there can be breaks to the upside. What we're seeing now, I would say, is a bear market breakdown to the upside to freedom. We see this nationalism and so on breaking out throughout the world, which is a break towards the level of freedom, because the closer you can get. I mean, nationalism is more individualistic than globalism, right? So individualism is where we want to get to, of course, as freedom, but it is a movement in that direction. And so and you can see by it, because the main trajectory, the main block of power in there is going completely apeshit. It's going completely nuts. So that it's stepping out of line, right? And the reason why I can say pretty confidently that this is a breakout from the norm of the trend of the bear market for freedom is because it hasn't played itself out, right? Like these things have got to play themselves out. Certain things have played themselves out. The reason for one of the reasons for this big break was the LGBTQ thing and the guys, grown men walking into little girls' washrooms and getting involved in women's sports and stuff. That was a break. It was one of the instigators. It was kind of like the tipping point for this movement. But the real calamity hasn't happened, which is financial breakdown, because money is what really makes things, is what greases the world in a way, and that there hasn't been a major economic breakdown yet. And so until that happens, the major trend will remain intact. Sure, we've had the Great Depression, we've had the meltdowns of the early 80s, we've had the 2010s, major recessions and stuff, but people can still eat basically, and things continue to grow. So when that changes, though, there'll be a big change. And so I guess I mean, in these sort of discussions, what I hope for 5 people who would listen to this, maybe, and maybe um, you know consider it, not as because I'm saying it or whatever, but just consider the logic behind it. That's all I'm saying. Don't listen to what I'm saying. Is what I'm saying doesn't have any validity. That's the way to approach it. Um, is it's much easier to go with the flow of a river if you're in a canoe than to try to paddle against the grain of the river. It's possible, sure, but it's much easier if you can go with the grain of the flow. So recognizing that there are trends and there is momentum to trends, the question is, can we pony on to those trends? Can we do it ethically? Can we know why we're doing it, and can we do it ethically? I think that's kind of the question. If we can possibly, then it's much easier to benefit from it because we've got the momentum that's happening, right? So, I mean, as YouTube begins to censor more and more people, they realize they're having a harder time to kick them off completely because they're going to run into antitrust legislation. They're going to run into First Amendment issues eventually. They're kind of getting that, right? But what they're doing is saying, well, you can't monetize what you're doing. Okay, so is that an opportunity to get onto another monetization program, right? Is there a way to benefit from it? Like this lady that I saw who was being interviewed in Hong Kong. She was a very, very famous individual. And all of a sudden, as soon as she spoke up against what China was doing in Hong Kong, of course, this is part of the trend. It's completely predictable. And she knew it. That she would no longer be allowed to go into China. All of her social media was blocked in China. Of course, this is what China does, right? This is what tyrants do. They don't argue. They just try to hide in a hole and do whatever they can to destroy you. She knew that. But then she asks herself the question, well, what can I do? Well, how can I roll with this? This is sort of like the moral outcry that happens. And what she found out was there's other ways that she could do this. Right? There was other ways. She didn't have to rely on China for her. She could, and she was getting interviews internationally and so on. So sometimes when there's a trend rolling, being aware of it, we can either if it's a moral trend or whatever, we can get on board and benefit from it. Or if it's not, we can point out the trend. We can gain, like there's 10 gentle ways, because sometimes going opposite to the current is within a small current. If you look at a river that's flowing, along the edge there's little eddy currents and so on. And some of those eddy currents are actually going completely backwards. They're going against the stream. But we could get into one of those side currents and so on. So I guess the suggestion is if we can get into some sort of a current, it's kind of like that old story with Gary Halbert there a while ago. He was talking about how this guy had come to him because Gary Halbert was a marketing genius, right? And people would come to him and say, hey, can you help me market my business or whatever? And this guy was in a town that used to have a big Sears Roebuck warehouse or whatever, and the company went bust, and that employed like 90% of the people. And the guy was trying to get Gary Halbert to help him to grow his construction business because it was in the tank. And Gary's suggestion was, well, maybe you should find out where all those people went and go there. It's like It's like it's figuring out that, there's controllables and uncontrollables. There's what we can do within ourselves, but there's also our whole environment that's going on. And if all of a sudden half the people are moving away and you needed those people to buy your stuff or get involved with what you're doing, then it's kind of like a wake-up call. That's like fighting against the current. And there's nothing wrong with going over there and doing some business over there or whatever it is. Where's the market, right? And anyway, so yeah, I don't think we should be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised by the march of change. And it's a lot of times in the first flush of it, it looks like that change. Well, it's certainly inconvenient. It doesn't help us in the short term, but it can help us because if we're nimble enough, we can then look because that change isn't in isolation, right? When a change happens, like when YouTube censors a whole bunch of people off the platform, those people aren't going away completely. They're going to change their behaviors. Okay, what are their behaviors? Maybe they're going to end up on BitChute, or maybe they're going to monetize somehow else, but they're not going away. And this is like the example of with Gary Halbert there. Just because all those people lost their jobs in this one town, that doesn't mean those people died. They're going to maybe just migrate over here, and then they need a bunch of services over here. So where is the momentum of the trend? The trends are always happening. And how can we use the trends or get into the eddy currents of the trends or whatever to benefit ourselves rather than slogging it out? Unless there's a real moral outcry within ourselves. But even then, even that moral outcry, we can pony on a couple things. We can pony on the moral outcry and the strength of the momentum in some way. Might be a side eddy current or whatever. Adding those several together can benefit us, I would say. Once again, the goal of these little videos that I have is not to teach anybody anything. If like I said to somebody the other day, hey, if after our discussion, if we both have more questions in our heads than we started with, than answers, that's a good thing, because the whole point is to learn how to think for ourselves, more or less. To think outside the box. To not take the prescribed propaganda that we've been fed about how things are. To some extent, it's true how things are, but there's also what we make of it, for sure. Steve here again, great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share. And hope to talk again soon. Bye for now.